everybody. Thank you for your patience and welcome to this RAN webinar. My name is Maximilian Ruf, and on behalf of the Radicalization Awareness Network and my colleagues Anne and Alvin, who you're seeing on the panelist side, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar on gaming and gamification in the context of PCVE. We want to look at the ways that gamers are using, that extremist policies are using and exploiting the gaming space, looking at different ways that they're doing so. And for that purpose, we have a panel of excellent speakers with us. We have Linda Schlegel from Model Saturday in Germany, Rachel Fielden from Moonshot in the UK, and we're planning on having George Weiss from Radio Dublin in Valencia in the Netherlands with us. Linda will start the presentations by discussing different ways and formats in which gaming, gamification platforms are being used by extremists and how they could in turn be used for PCVE purposes. Then Rachel Fielden will continue with the presentation, drawing on experiences with interventions in the gaming space and through case studies of pilot interventions. And lastly, George is planned as a speaker about the specific type of intervention that he and his colleagues have been working on, the so-called active bystander model. So you can see we have a nice progression plan throughout the program, going from a broader perspective, laying the knowledge bases down to lessons learned and real-life experiences. But now, finally, to our first speaker. Linda Schlegel is a PhD candidate at the Goethe University in Frankfurt, Germany. She's focusing on storytelling and PCVE narrative campaigns in her work during her PhD work. In addition, she's also an associate fellow at Modul's Center for Applied Research on De-Radicalization and the Peace Research Institute Frankfurt, or PRIF. She's a founding member of the Extremism and Gaming Research Network, which is one of the initiatives that I mentioned earlier that was developed in the last year, founded in the last year. And chances are that if you've been following the gaming and extremism PCVE space a little bit over the past couple of months, then you will have come across her name. She's become one of the go-to experts on this topic lately, and she's already written excellent papers for us at RAN. So we are very glad to have you here today, Linda, and to welcome you again. And now, finally, I'm handing over to you. The screen is yours, so to say.
Thank you, Max, for the kind introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm just going to give you a brief introduction on gaming and gaming culture being used by extremists, as well as sort of some ideas on how PCVE might be able to utilize that space as well. But let me start with some caveats. Max already said that. There's currently no indication that video games are actually causing violence. I know there has been a debate since the 90s, but research by far and large has not found that causal connection. It's not as easy as people make it out to be. So please don't take anything that I say as suggesting that gaming is somehow related, intrinsically related to violence or to radicalization. Secondly, I would like to keep this as positive as possible with this topic. So I'm not one to sort of have a panic about gaming and radicalization, but I rather want to emphasize the positive aspects of gaming and how it's an opportunity for PCVE. And let me also caution that currently there's a lack of research and a lack of PCVE projects in the gaming space to draw from. So please take everything that I say with a grain of salt. It's what we have worked on so far, but it's really preliminary. We've only been looking at this basically since the Christchurch attack, so around 3 years, which in research terms is nothing. So really take this with a grain of salt. I'm just going to walk you through a couple of examples of how extremists have been using gaming and gaming spaces, and also how there's a possibility for PCVE here. So the first one, the first part is the production and modification of video games by extremists. So some extremist groups have produced their own video games. As you can see on the right, you have Heimatdefender from the Identitarian movement in Germany, and the other screenshot on the top is from Hezbollah's video games called Special Forces. There are a couple of other examples that we have seen, but by far and large, this is a rare occurrence. simply because making video games is actually expensive and you need a lot of skills to do that, to make them in such a way that they're appealing to audiences. So we've not seen a lot of this. What we've seen more of is modification of existing games. So people taking games that already exist and somehow modifying them to fit their ideology. We've seen that in Minecraft, for instance, where you can visit concentration camps and play a bit of Holocaust, or in Roblox, where we have seen like a white ethno state being produced. So it's really radicalized individuals taking the modification tools that these games give them to express their ideology. It's to draw attention because video games are being seen as cool, are drawing young people towards them. And as I said, you can build your own world. That's something that's intrinsically interesting to extremists to express their ideology. And from a strategy standpoint, often it's also been a PR stunt, at least for the identitarians. They liked all the attention that they got, all the headlines that they got with, oh my God, right-wing extremists are luring kids into with their video games, etc. So that's been a nice benefit for them. But we've also seen a lot of bottom-up action, especially with the modifications. So what could PCVE do regarding production and modification of video games? We've actually seen the production of some PCVE games. One of the famous examples is the Decount game from our friends in Austria, a game that's a mobile app game where you can play sort of different stories of radicalization, and it's being explained. We've also seen an interesting initiative coming from the Netherlands, Gaming with the Police. So they take existing video games and actually just stream with gamers and sort of talk to them about lots of topics. And people respond to that really well because Gaming with the Police sounds really cool, and being able to ask any sort of questions that you have. Modifications, we've seen not so much. I'm assuming that that's difficult because you need to know the game inside out in order to make modifications. And the problem with that as a whole is that you need to compete with professional entertainment games if you're trying to make a video game in PCVE. So that's been really difficult. We've seen some examples, but not too much. Secondly, extremists have been using in-game communication tools, such as chats or other networking features, but you see a big question mark on the right because we don't actually know where and when and how. It's one of the big black holes that we still have. We think this is going on because this is going on in terms of grooming as well, sexual grooming of children. So it just makes sense to assume that it's also happening in terms of extremism, but we don't actually know. The advantages would be that these spaces are difficult to police, often because they're in real-time communication. Extremists can meet the audience where they are and use the anonymity of video games and these sort of gaming chats to meet people basically where they are. Because we don't know much about this, there actually haven't been a lot of PCVE interventions in this space either. You could think of sort of digital youth work that might be an option, adding some positive voices to these chats, supporting attacked players might be a way to not having to go into these chats, but still offering support for people who are experiencing bad things in these chats. And sort of trying to talk about what are enhanced reporting mechanisms? How can we even find out more about what is happening in these chats? Because currently, we obviously don't know. Thirdly, extremists have been present in gaming spaces. So we've always been talking about like gaming adjacent platforms. It's still a bit of a weird term. It's not really clear what is a gaming platform, what is a gaming adjacent platform. On the top right, you see Steam and Discord, which are connected to the gaming community, but also used for other things. You can find discussions on basically anything on Discord. And then DLive and Twitch, which are streaming services, again, streams about almost anything, but it started as a gaming platform. We've also seen gaming content on YouTube. There is actually a tab on YouTube called YouTube Gaming, lots of discussions on Reddit. So this is not something that's staying on gaming platforms, but gaming spaces are broader than the 4 platforms that we always talk about. We've seen live streaming of attacks, planning and coordinating on these platforms, vetting new recruits through Discord servers. So basically, like any other digital platform, extremists try to use the affordances of these platforms to their ends. Also using the networking and communication features, and obviously, especially in terms of live streaming, the popularity of these platforms. I mean, Twitch has millions of users every single day. People are streaming a lot of stuff, so it's really popular. And again, difficult to police because it's real-time communication. How do you actually police a live stream? Maybe even in a language that you don't speak. So it's really difficult. And obviously, it's difficult for PCVE actors as well. You could think about sort of live streaming with your own accounts on Twitch, supporting streamers, the dissemination of counter narratives on these platforms, although it's kind of difficult because Discord, for instance, is really fragmented and insular. So how do you put counter narratives in these spaces? It's a difficult discussion, but it's definitely something that's worthwhile to discuss for PCVE. Identify at-risk gamers or at-risk users on these platforms? Is there a way to monitor communication? Can we somehow work with the platforms to do that? And then obviously also in these spaces, digital youth work, and actually Good Gaming, Well-Played Democracy, one of the projects of the Amadeo Antonio Foundation in Germany, is trying that, is sort of piloting that. But so far there aren't really any experiences that we can draw from to sort of give best practices for this. We've also seen a bunch of gaming cultural references being used by extremists. So similar aesthetics, the perspectives of a first-person shooter game where you have like a helmet camera and then you see the top of the rifle. It's been in a lot of ISIS videos. And on the right, you can see a bunch of examples how that played out in posters and in Twitter and in tweets and stuff like that. So gaming language reference to video games is really popular, because these games have such a pop cultural appeal, because they're cool, they're familiar to the audience, and you're meeting them with what they like. And so that makes propaganda overall more appealing to these audiences. Now, something similar could be useful for PCVE. I mean, we have posters and narrative campaigns and tweets and whatever. We could think about sort of using gaming aesthetics in narrative campaigns. There's actually an example that I want to show you, which is the Austrian campaign Jamal al-Khatib, like a YouTube campaign against jihadism, using or appropriating video game aesthetics in like a really basic way, sort of over-the-shoulder shots and some fight scenes and things like that. And you can see how similar they are to Assassin's Creed, which, if you don't know, it's a really popular video game series. So they're just trying to copy the aesthetics to make their videos more appealing. And that's something that could be done a lot more. The same with gaming languages and references and text. There are a lot of things that you could play with. In addition, gaming music is something that we haven't really talked about, but that's something that has a lot of appeal, that a lot of people think is cool and use when they're working and, you know, things like that. So can we somehow use that for PCVE? It's an open question. Again, there are not enough examples to draw on for best practices. And lastly, we have gamification, which is the use of game design elements in non-gaming contexts. So if you're taking points and levels and leaderboards and rates and all these types of concepts that video games are made of, and you take them to a non-game context. The Identitarians, again, they seem to be on the forefront of this. They tried to launch an app called Patriot Peer, where they tried to do exactly that. You could collect points for going to rallies or for visiting certain German cultural places. And they even had the idea of having like a Patriot radar, kind of like a Pokemon Go type of thing, where you could locate other Patriots in your area, so a connecting tool. But we've also seen other examples. For example, gamified manifestos. The Halle attacker had a whole section on achievements detailed in his manifesto. So you can see the gaming culture coming out in these things. It's not just using video games, it's actually gaming culture coming through in the communication of these extremists. And then you have virtual scoreboards on Chan boards and things like that of body counts, people saying, oh, I want to beat his score, I want to be like him, I want to be on top of the scoreboard. That all of that is gamification, and it's something that we need to watch. And for PCVE, to my knowledge, there hasn't been any PCVE intervention using gamified mechanisms. If you are the person who did that, please drop that in the chat because we're really interested in hearing about this. But you could do something like that, like an Instagram caption contest. You could do some quests on TikTok or other platforms. You could do positive rates, getting people together an hour or two online, just like the trolls do, but doing it positively. We could do competitions and using game elements in offline PCVE maybe. I mean, everything we've talking about so far is digital, but there's nothing stopping you from implementing game elements in the offline world as well. So that's definitely something to be discussed. Now, if that's your face right now, like, oh my God, all of this sounds terrible. I need to get my kids off Roblox. Oh my gosh. Don't panic. We got you. Let me remind you of the caveats that I said in the beginning. There's just not enough research. We need to know more about what's going on, about the scale of the problem, about in which spaces is it most prevalent, what's actually going on. So there's really a need to have more research and to have more monitoring before we can move forward and actually say something more substantial than what I've just done by highlighting examples. Also, if you're thinking about, okay, how can I learn more about this? How can I incorporate maybe gaming in my interventions? Just talk to people. I mean, Max said there are over 3 billion gamers in the world. Chances are in your organization, you have a gamer without knowing that you have a gamer. So find someone in your own organization who knows something about this. Talk to GiveCT, talk to the platforms. There are a lot of avenues that you could take to learn more about this. And there's no need to reinvent the wheel. So everything that I've said, theoretically now what PCVE could do, isn't that far off from what we've been doing for the past 10 years in digital PCVE anyways. Please don't think that just because it's about gaming, it needs to be like some completely new approach. You can use a lot of the tools of digital PCVE that you already have to actually start. And that's, if you take nothing else away from this talk, please take away, we need to start somewhere. We need more experiences of PCVE practitioners actually using gaming in their interventions. There's no use in us talking about the same handful of examples all the time. That way we can't build like enough of a corpus to actually say, okay, this works, this doesn't work, these are best practices. There's no way to do that unless someone is brave enough to actually start. So that would be my call to action for all of you, to actually start somewhere. If you want more information, because this has been sort of a rapid fire of me just going over a lot of stuff in a very short amount of time, check out the Extremism and Gaming Research Network that Max mentioned. We'll post the website in the chat. There are a lot of resources on the webpage. You can check out GNet Insights on gaming and PCVE. There has been some work done as well. And of course, a couple of run papers that we have and that we'll also put in the chat for you to just get an idea of what has been talked about and what are the recommendations that we already have. With that, I would like to thank you for your attention. I'll also put my email address and the email address of the Extremism and Gaming Research Network in the chat as well. Feel free to reach out. And with that, I'm giving the digital mic back to Max.
Thank you, Linda, for that fantastic overview. Even though you've said that there's a lack of research, and we've only been doing this for 3 years, basically, I think you just showed us a really broad variety of what there already is and what there could be maybe also in the future. So I think it's quite comprehensive already in a way, but of course you're right. I think we need a lot more work, and we need a lot more experiences from practice also. So not a lot more pilot projects, probably a lot more interventions. That why not stigmatizing and hopefully doing no harm. Can give us a bit more knowledge and learn knowledge of this space. Thank you very much. Now we're handing over to Rachel Fielden from Moonshot. She is an analyst and a manager at Moonshot, working on the design and delivery of digital counter messaging and intervention methods, as you can see also on the screen. She focuses on monitoring and evaluation of online at-risk user activity. And within this scope, she's also involved in the development of of technology and tools to counter and prevent online extremist activity. Rachel, too, has been quite active in this field in the past couple of months and years, and I'm excited to welcome you today to hear about your experiences and the lessons you're about to present, and would like to welcome you to the stage. Over to you, Rachel. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Max, and thank you for that lovely introduction. Also, a huge thank you to Linda for that amazing presentation. It was really wonderful to hear about how we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can take how games are built to make our CVE and PVE recommendations. And I want to build upon your fantastic presentation today to talk a bit more in depth about gaming interventions, its history, some of the best practices that are out there so far, and our great ambitions for the future. So technology has granted extremist groups more power to coordinate attacks, disseminate propaganda, and recruit more members to their cause than ever before. Video games and online gaming, whether in a casual way to relax or a more dedicated hobby, can play a key role in the way that individuals think and behave. Just as anything you spend a lot of time doing can impact your behavior and outlooks on life. So whether organically or strategically, extremist ideologies can spread on gaming platforms as they can spread anywhere online and even offline. As my colleague Linda has mentioned, gaming culture and platforms have been co-opted by extremist groups or utilized to spread their own messaging and have gone as far as creating their own games. At the same time, as Linda has already mentioned, digital games can and have been used to spread positive and de-radicalizing messages, and they've been used as a means of intervention. So this makes a lot of sense, not only because of how influential games and their corresponding communities can be for contributing to your sense of self and your sense of belonging, but also because how games have historically been used for facilitating education. This is nothing new. I remember using games in primary school to learn how to type. It's nothing new to be using games to instill certain messages or forms of education or certain kinds of behaviors. So when conducting interventions, not just in the gaming space, but anywhere, any kind of CVE, PVE intervention that we conduct, the ultimate goal is to impact long-lasting behavioral and attitudinal change. And the best way of achieving that, particularly in the online space, is to turn passive consumption of your intervention content into active engagement with it. And the big question is, how exactly do you do that? So games are a wonderful answer and a wonderful solution for that. They offer a valuable opportunity for interventions. By their very nature, users are encouraged to engage and interact with your content, not just passively consume it. Through games, users can be shown, not told, about the dangers about radicalization. They can be shown and not told how they should be interacting with their peers online. Games also offer ways of making your interventions more, subtle, more familiar, and of course, and definitely more entertaining, which is something I think we all struggle with when we're thinking of how to best engage with users online. There are many examples of games that have been designed in the last 5 years to combat different types of online harms. Some of these Linda has already touched on. These include games to counter violent extremism, gender-based violence, as well as mis and disinformation. These games can vary considerably in style, design, from scenario-based to fictional, to cartoon, to real-life characters, all of the above. Some examples include the Bad News game, Harmony Square, and as Linda mentioned, D-Count. They're all great games that take place in artificial environments, such as the fictional place Harmony Square. And another is Gamification. First, I'm gonna toot my own horn here, but it's produced by ourselves at Moonshot, and it takes place in a realistic and universally recognized family chat scenario. Some argue that video games can be particularly effective in interventions because you enter into a sort of play mindset. So allowing yourself to engage in willing disbelief, whether it's zombies or wizards or something completely artificial. We know that it's just a game, and that makes the sense of separation between ourselves and the real life and playing a character in the fictional world can make us less reactive and thus more receptive to different points of view that we would immediately reject in a non-gaming environment. However, those on the other side of the argument question to what extent the player in an intervention style game would be able to apply what they were learning in a fantasy game to the real world. And it's been questioned whether or not games miss out on making a more powerful point about the dangers of radicalization or other online harms because they are presented as fictional problems. Regardless of whether or not intervention games are more or less successful, should they reflect reality or fiction, we do have some preliminary results to suggest that games may be more effective than other forms of digital content in terms of attracting and maintaining the attention of at-risk individuals, which I'll go into in a bit more in the next slide. So at Moonshot, we've experimented with all kinds of content. We try and basically deliver PVE and CVE content that the user is looking for. So if the person is looking for literature, if they're looking for podcasts or music or games, we try and deliver the same sort of content back to them. So we're not forcing boring or uninteresting content down their throats. It's already somewhat something that they would be interested in. So we did a similar a pilot with a game in Indonesia, and we had some promising results where we tried to compare the game to more static content, so a website that contained videos and quizzes. So a little bit about the game. The game is based in Indonesia, as I've mentioned, hence the name Gali Fakta, which means dig for the facts. And the game, it's not CVE focused per se, but it was aiming to inoculate users against disinformation. And we ran the game campaign against, as I said, a website with quizzes and lessons, and also videos with the same content adapted for each use case. We then tested this using A/B testing among a sample of users who were already shown to be engaging with disinformation online. As you can see in this final square here, our game was 1,185% more engaging and took more, and users spent more time engaging with the content when it was in the gaming format. This is really, really important in the context where people weren't looking to engage with the game. They weren't looking to interact with countering disinformation or media literacy content at this time. So although this game didn't directly counter violent extremism, but disinformation, these results are an indication of how the engaging manner of games may have a positive impact on how much time vulnerable users spend with our counter content. And in the online space, that's incredibly valuable. But gaming in CVE is not just about creating games to embody your content and engage with your audience members. That's just one of the ways of utilizing games and gamification for de-radicalizing purposes. Many others were mentioned by Linda today, but I'll just mention a few others to kind of bolster your inspiration. So gaming can also provide a means of connecting with your audience in anonymous environments that they feel safe and comfortable within. So as Linda mentioned, in the context of the pandemic and the inability for the Dutch police to build offline community of relationships of trust, they set up the program where they played games with normal people. So there's no pressure to do anything but play a game and chat, and they've seen notable increased levels of trust and people sharing their grievances. There was even a case where users shared incidents where they witnessed a crime or something like that, and they never went to the police about it. And this ultimately led to those crimes being solved. In a post-pandemic world where face-to-face interactions may be limited, this avenue has proven to be a viable solution. There have been similar pilots to this in the UK as well as in the US with some ex-military. I'm happy to share links to those in the after my speech today. We also have a North American partner that's playing games with neo-Nazis on Roblox and building relationships through the shared experience. This normalized setting allows for barriers to be broken down and for trust to be built. Although these interventions are laborious and come with their own set of significant risks and ethical considerations, they benefit from not having to create or impersonate the gaming feel and environment, which can sometimes feel, fake or impersonating, exactly as I said. Instead, they utilize what already exists, where players are already comfortable, and enables the intervention providers to be more open about their intentions. As Linda mentioned, the possibilities of engaging with your audience through games and gamification is endless. It's the interventions that have been set up in the past 5 years or so, some of which I've mentioned today and some I haven't had time for, only hit the tip of the iceberg when it comes to what's possible in this space. There's still so much more that can be done to engage with different users and to appeal to their specific interests. There's lots of kinds of games out there, and we've only, like I said, hit the tip of the iceberg. We could exploit and develop ways in our interventions with the types of games they enjoy, what they seek to gain from playing games, and ultimately reduce their susceptibility to extremist content online. For example, at Moonshot, we've looked into the potential of tapping into esports as a way of engaging different communities and rebuilding community trust. On the other hand of the scale, we've also discussed setting up small-scale Dungeons and Dragons parties where players can follow loose fantasy-based narratives. Whatever the intervention, more empirical research into the role and impact of gamification in the CVE context is needed. I'm sorry to keep droning and hammering on that point, but it is. I hope this inspires you all after this call to really push gaming, push the ways that you can explore it. And like Linda said, speaking to your peers and speaking to what you already know and have experienced in gaming. One of our goals at Moonshot ran and our combined efforts with the Extremism in Gaming Research Network is to do exactly that, to contribute to and to produce more robust and more innovative frameworks, methods, and evaluations of the use of gamification in CVE. Yeah, but sadly, that's all I have time for today. Please do let me know if there's any questions in the slide. Did whiz through it all today, but yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Rachel. No, okay, sorry. Thank you very much for that. That was super interesting. Thanks also for highlighting, because we're always talking about the negative aspects and how extremists are exploiting and using and abusing these spaces. So thanks also a lot for highlighting the positive aspects and the potential that we're seeing in this field, because there is a lot of potential. And we will be hearing a bit more about that also in a little bit. And we have, I think, some time to discuss this also in the discussion following your presentations. I also particularly like, you said hammering on about it, but I think it's really relevant to highlight the fact that there is more research necessary. So also to everybody here who has the abilities to maybe set up funding structures for that. I'm looking at our policymaking friends especially. I think this is a really, really good time to do that. We're seeing some activity in that regard already, but there could probably be more. Thank you very much, Rachel. We will now go on to our last presentation before going to the final discussion. And that presentation will be held by George Weiss. He is the director of Radio La Benevolencia Humanitarian Tools Foundation in the Netherlands. And as such, he's engaged in the development of educational communications tools, fighting against hatred and violence in different countries around the globe. He and his team have been working on a number of different initiatives in the context of gaming, and now he will share some of their insights and experiences with us. In particular, one specific intervention or approach. I'm happy that you agreed to be here today. I'm happy that you are here now, and the screen is yours, George.
My organization deals with entertainment education. That means educating people through means by which they're getting educated through entertainment, whether they be soap operas, whether they be different kind of entertainment programs. And we've been trying out these techniques in our African projects for a long time with quite good results. And we've been looking for a long time for doing this in the European context. And one of the problems really of serious gaming and of doing games that really try and educate the audience through serious gaming is that they are serious games, and that very often means that the target audience themselves may just suss out what you're trying to do and might switch off. So I am going to talk about one element in one project that we've been doing the last 2 years. It's the Gamer project. That is, Gamer stands for Generating Awareness to Mitigate Extremism and Radicalization, and it consists of one MOBA game, one massive online battle arena game, which is gory and politically incorrect and full of killings and things like that. But embedded in it are psychological messages that try to create awareness in the player itself about his or her reactions to crisis and fear, notions of in-grouping, notions of scapegoating, and afterwards creating violence for that. The problem was, of course, we had only 2 years to develop this game, and we had to actually create a sort of brigade of promoters for that, whom we called active bystanders. Next, Alvin, could you switch the slide, please? Oh, that's taking time. Wait a second. Yeah, so we have, maybe you can just do the full text immediately, just press on all the buttons. That's good. Thank you. Oh, that's it. So originally, these active bystanders were tasked with promoting our gaming tool. I cannot really tell you the name of the game right now. It's downloadable from Steam, actually, but we decided for reasons of confidentiality not to mention the game itself, so you can write to me afterwards to find out. We created a group of people that were tasked to go into gaming environments and promote our game in those environments, both as a cover for their action, posing as promoters, and also as a jump-off point for discussion. And when doing that, they were trained to apply gentle conversational techniques like motivational interviewing and empathic listening, non-judgmental techniques of talking with people they encounter in those fora, in order to bring them forward and embed the messaging of the actual game itself. Why are they called active bystanders? Well, this is due to something called the bystander effect, which was researched in the 1960s, which is the effect on a group of people that sees some crisis happening, some bad things happening in front of them, and nobody acts because they think that another person is going to intervene instead of them. And what actually happens if one person starts intervening, the group dynamic changes and they pull the group with them in order to intervene. And what they are trying to promote together with the actual game that they're promoting is something we call the continuum of violence. This is the range of circumstances and triggers for your own emotions when you are faced with a crisis, or when you are faced with your personal crisis, or whole societies can be faced with that crisis, which then creates a need for in-grouping. And when you do in-grouping, actually, you look for a group for your own safety and for getting positive identity about yourself. And once you are in that group needs to move in some place. And the easiest way for that group to move is to find an enemy and then engage in scapegoating, and further from engaging in scapegoating, promoting further violence. That's really, in short, what our psychologists, we work together with a team of psychologists, have combined. This is the combined research into the psychology of what creates perpetrators during the genocides and atrocities and radicalizations of the 20th century. Can we go to the next slide, Alvin? So there were problems with the original role of promoting our game. The main problem was that we only had 2 years to promote the game, and within the budgetary framework, we actually only could create a prototype of that game, a beta version of the game, and not the finished gold master version of the game, so that the game looks very good. Actually, it has its storylines, and but it lacks certain mechanics like lip syncs in the animation and ancillary storylines, which would be needed to make it complete. And once it is complete, then the people who could download it from Steam would form a community in which our promoters could go to. But this was non-existent because as it is only in beta stage, few people downloaded the game itself. We measured actually our game in terms of the effect it has on people, and it has, very surprisingly, almost to ourselves, had quite a tendency to conspiracy thinking has been counteracted in relation to control games and all kinds of things like that. I don't have time to do that, to go through that right now, because I'm only talking about the active bystanders. But in any case, our active bystanders, our team of active bystanders, had to be pivoted to another role. And the role was that they would be visiting other gaming fora and simply go on with the messaging of the game without the game itself, which placed them at a disadvantage, but still we could reach further sequencing of actions. Could you go to the next slide, Alvin, please? Of course, one of the things in terms of starting such a process is, of course, you need to map the gaming forums that exist and where you find the target audience of vulnerable individuals. Our teams, the team that we set up, were composed of teams in our 3 partner countries for this project. The partner countries were Hungary, Italy, and the Netherlands. They, in the end, were only about 15 active bystanders, 5 or 6 in each. Here in Hungary, we had 2 women and 5 men. In Italy, we had 2 men and 1 woman. In the Netherlands, we had 5 men. But actually, this looks like a constant number, but there was tremendous turnover in the active bystanders. For example, women found it a little bit harder to do this kind of work and dropped out in Hungary, not in Italy. But each time somebody would drop out, somebody else would come in to take their place, because it's quite an exciting activity to engage in. Can I have the next slide, Alvin? I can't let you rest. And the interactions that resulted in this were, well, here it looks like quite a small number, 428 interactions in different chat rooms with different gamers. But considering that the training, and I'm going to go into that in a moment, took a bit of a longer time, we had about 4 to 5 months of interactions where this was happening. We counted 349 general interactions and 79 meaningful interactions. And the meaningful interactions consisted of being able to talk further, chat further in the chat rooms about the messaging that was originally in the game. I'm putting here only 4 messages in there. The main thing is really to understand that when you're confronted with your own insecurity, whether it be social or other, or whether you're confronted with a big crisis, you tend to look for security and positive identity by joining a group, and this group will very often turn to scapegoat other groups and create destructive ideologies in a slow process that we can illustrate in order to create hope for the person. And this is actually part of the recruitment that actually works also, because hope and positive identity by joining a group plays a big role when you're joining an extremist group. The passivity by witnesses and bystanders reaffirms the perpetrators. We therefore have to be active. That is actually something more about our active bystanders themselves. So when an active bystander intervenes and tries to pull others into this action, that is what is researched usually in the bystander effect research and in trying to counteract things. And the general mode of both our games and what the active bystanders were doing was the motto. Actually, the motto we always act under is attacking problems and not people. We don't do anything moralistic. We don't say make love, not war. We don't try to engage in these kind of talks or interactions. Basically, it is just about being effective to arrange your own insecurity, to deal with the crisis at hand. Can I have the next slide, Alvin? And so these are the kind of things you would then be getting when you start going into a space where you have to interact with extremists. So immediately, if you are an active bystander, you go into a chat room and you get this sort of first coding to see who you are and say, feel free to say something racist. You already have to deal with that yourself. It places you in a moral conflict. You have to know, you have to be ready in order to deal with that. Either it's not very good to be completely fake. It's very good if you have some borderline statements ready for that kind of thing. But basically, you have to simply enter that environment and put your head into that. And you have to avoid reacting to the misogynist comments that you see over here. Don't be judgmental. But instead of that, do motivational interviewing and empathic listening, meaning going more into what moves the other person actually to say the things that they are doing and how their environment is working for them. Can we have the next slide? And there we go. So the training took a long time. We were aided by Robert Rell, one of the founders of Free Suicide in Sweden. The main exit organizations all over Europe have seen his involvement, and he was involved in teaching about violent extremism, what it consists of, but also symbols, usernames, slogans, involved in their collecting the characteristics that people, because it's very difficult to actually know who you're talking to. You have to really see what kind of vulnerable person you're dealing with. Then basically in our mapping activities, we created lists of helpful attitudes and strategies in order to place little seeds of doubts in people vulnerable to radicalization. You can't really expect changing anybody's mind or anybody's kind of behavior when engaging in these chats. You can really just place little bits of self-awareness in that person and creating their doubt. And ourselves, we had to work very strong to develop our ideal active bystander profiles and engaging in role plays and discussing conversation starters in order to do this, and lots and lots and lots of conversations, lots and lots and lots of entering without doing anything and just watching, and then slowly going in and engaging. These interactions were recorded in logbooks that gave our supervisors and mentors. We had a team of supervisors that in each country would coordinate the actions of the active bystanders, but we also had mentors that dealt with their aggressions, their fears, the things that they encountered, basically. And can we go further? There are obvious things that you need to observe when you go into extremist spaces. Security is one thing. We had Olivier Kauberg, who is part of our audience, I think, actually doing security training, but also other security trainings together with Peril, which is a team at American University in the States that engage a lot with extremists and that know a lot about interacting with them. And then you have to avoid certain things, like, for example, discussing religion. You never know where the other people are. Are they radical atheists? Are they radical Christians? Are they radical Muslims? You don't want to get into these kind of things altogether. You don't want to engage in any kind of debating. You want to engage in how and what and why. Try to get into the personal space of the other person. And again, you might be asked to say racist things. You have to sort of deal with that. So there is a bit of play acting involved, but usually we try and avoid that as much as possible, saying little things and then going on from there. And of course, you have to avoid making people suspicious by asking them about their personal details, things that influence their security. And you have to, if you are a person that can be ironic and sarcastic yourself, that's great, but also you get a lot of that as blowback onto you. And the next slide, Alvin. And so we encountered lots of challenges. We had 4 or 5 months in order to engage in this, and this is only the beginning of the activity. First of all, you don't really know who you're encountering, who is reading you, who is dealing with you. You're dealing with people who have nicknames. People use slogans and phrases. Sometimes you don't understand the slang and the jargon and the references they use. Further training is always needed in these kind of things, and you just don't know how people might react. So you have to also engage accordingly with empathic statements that you can make, and then wait for what happens. And we are not allowed to engage with minors. So one of the risks is that there might be minors in the chat room, and you have to try and suss that out if possible, because you're not supposed to interact with them. So yeah, and you get a lot of negative blowback. You might be ignored, offended, simply kicked out, and you will for sure sometimes feel bad and weak and vulnerable. And can I have the next slide, Alvin? And well, maybe we'll. I was going to go into a lot of the problems that we had and what this means also for the future. In general, mapping is really incredibly important, and you have to find hidden communities. People appear on Discord all the time and disappear on Discord all the time. There are problems of access. Of course, people are going to try and vet you, and this can be tricky sometimes, so you get kicked out. Yeah, I mean, moderation is another issue. Actually, once you try an issue, you might get kicked out yourself if you're not careful, and then of course people disappear according to that. And our active bystanders also had moral issues sometimes when saving them. So yeah, the forum, do the whole thing. I think it doesn't work. Yeah. So I mean, we had to. Obviously, gaming-related forums are in games often related to World War II, Holocaust, and modern-day conflicts. There are special Discord servers with extremist gaming Discord. And I think I'm not saying much new to a lot of people here. And we would there anyway collect and need more information and research. This is what everybody is saying, and need further training. There we had to also enter non-gaming related forums. That's in the next slide, I think. Right. So the usual Facebook groups, Reddit, Discord. We didn't go into Telegram really yet enough, for sure. And and the few players, I don't know why that's, disregard that sentence about that came in from another slide, I think. So, okay, but in any case, once you go into the chat rooms, it is hard to differentiate about who are the outspoken extremists. Yes, sometimes when you encounter a chat, it's quite easy, but vulnerable people, this is really a difficulty. And also it is very difficult to see the effect that you're having actually when you're doing that. Is there not another sentence in that? Yes. And our people very often, when posting things and waiting, it gives you that feeling of you're shouting into a valley and you don't know what's coming back, and you feel quite alone, really. So next games. So that leads us to actually dealing with directions for the future. Let me just see myself here where we are, because the relevance of active bystandership, it is an attitude actually, and it actually formed our people themselves. Actually, the people, our active bystanders, experience changes in themselves, which also go to the physical, to the normal environment that you go on. You feel the need to intervene and act as an active bystander, which is very beneficial if we are widening the network and the game. So we want to establish a larger network of active bystanders. It would consist of, yes, gamer volunteers anytime, because those are motivated people that want to join us. But we also, in order to create more sustainability and more focused work, we want to train social workers and make them specialize in gaming. and how to operate in a gaming space. And very importantly, that we noticed because of the lack of the game to promote. The active bystanders need a mission. They need to know which way to direct the people they're encountering to, and there we get to exit work, and we really want to train exit workers to be proactive and not only wait until people want to leave the radical environment, but also be able to go into gaming environments and talk to people there and try to work with off-platforming them into exit groups, which is actually something that recruiters do anyway. Recruiters to radical groups do that the other way around. So we actually want to do that with exit groups. And you can also engage in police training in gaming. Police need to be able to detect warning signs in chat rooms that they see, and they can be active in clarifying legalities to the active bystanders, as well as to people that if you use the right methodology for your dialogue, as well as talking about the legalities involved if they ever get into such a chat. Active bystandership, we're gone. It's too much time has passed.
Thank you very much, George, for those deep insights into your work and into what you've been doing. It's really quite interesting, and I think by also showing an example of direct and person-to-person interaction online, rather than just people interacting with content, I think has also highlighted a couple of quite relevant challenges that you've already touched upon, but I think we can discuss some of those in the discussion. Yes, with the question in the chat or in the Q&A, I think on the ethics, we can open the panel again, also to include Linda and Rachel, because that's a very relevant question that we also have in our notes. Katie's asking what ethics should be considered when designing gaming interventions. In particular, could any aspect of do no harm be considered in relation to any interventions with violent extremism? I think that obviously then depends on the type of intervention that you're planning. There's probably many more caveats when you're working in a one-on-one person-to-person setting than in gamifying maybe a sort of a narrative, for example. But would you maybe, to bring Rachel and Linda back in and then go on to George, would one of you like to respond to that? Rachel and
Sure. I think it kind of depends if we're talking PVE or CVE. I feel like in PVE, if you're doing prevention work and you're talking to non-radicalized individuals and you're trying to sort of inoculate them or whatever, I feel like it's a lot less likely to do harm. If you're doing CVE and you're working with extremists, I think you need to be careful not to connect them to each other with a gaming intervention. Like the last thing you want to do is to have like what right-wing extremists do anyways, right? These Call of Duty tournaments or whatever, if we're talking esports, the last thing you want to do is to set that up and then end up connecting violent extremists who didn't know each other, but they love to talk to each other. And then, that sort of thing. I feel like that you need to be really careful, especially in like digital interventions. If you're just putting something out there that has like a networking function, it needs to be thought through how to react to that if it's in the CVE space, and how to manage the risk. But maybe Rachel also has some more input on that.
No, I think that's a really, really strong point that I think often gets missed. I think in efforts to kind of make your job easier and more simpler by putting people in one space or if even focus groups or whatever, that can seem really useful and a really helpful tool maybe in other spaces, but can be, you're inadvertently recruiting for them or inadvertently making those connections. And I think that can be a serious point of ethical and do no harm considerations. I think that's like number one at the top. Kind of pivoting slightly to our experience with the disinformation inoculation game, we had a lot of do no harm considerations that we had to think through, especially around the idea of inoculating, which is using smaller, more like harmless versions of disinformation to essentially prepare people for disinformation they would see elsewhere. And we had to think long and hard about what that looked like. And if we were dumbing it down too much that it was no longer effective, but could we really be reporting to be sharing stuff as well? And so that's why it really worked in the context where we were only sharing the game to people who we could prove were already engaging with similar ideas, so that we were not presenting anything new to them. But we really had to work through that idea quite extensively to make sure we were never exposing anybody new to any disinformation they wouldn't have come across. But yeah, I'll pass this back over to George, especially in your work with active bystanders and passive bystanders. Was this something that you had to consider as well in your work?
Well, we had to, first of all, ensure the security of our active bystanders, and the issue of impersonating a racist is always an issue when doing that, and this is really a difficult one. But I mean, for us actually, because we do entertainment education, so we try to really find, we really do implicit messaging and not explicit messaging. This is anyway a very thin line to walk ethically, because these methods can be misused, and you really have to be careful about how they are used. And so in our gaming intervention and also in our other interventions, whether they be soap operas, TV programs, or other, we really focus on creating self-awareness in our target audience. And that is it. That is all we're trying to do. We're not trying to give it. I mean, yeah, countering disinformation is one thing, but I mean, the main thing that we focus on is really the mental state of people who are apt to be recruited to violence, and that we really want to keep it there and not do anything else besides that. Entertainment education is, by the way, used in health education a lot. It's like you find theater plays, you find games and things like that, and how to put on a condom for HIV and other things, but it's usually not used in order to counter radicalization. So
Interesting.
Just going on that.
Yeah, so there is obviously then maybe that's also pointing towards looking into adjacent fields and seeing how other fields of health education, social work, and so on, youth work in general, might be already implementing these sort of things. I was wondering also, still regarding the ethics issue and the in-person contact, about follow-up, because if you're working with people directly, and if you're working on changing their mindsets, their behaviors, their attitudes, and trying to inside change there, is there any way you can ensure their safety then? So if they fall into a crisis, for example, do you have any mechanisms in place for that? Maybe directed at George first, because you're like in the direct interaction, but also, is there anything you know about that? Are there any considerations? Do you think you would need to? Is that necessary, or do you think it isn't? Just to get your thoughts on that.
Can you hear me now? Because I have these earphones.
Yes.
So it depends on the situation you encounter. Basically, you try to off-platform people to mental health practitioners or social workers or exit workers to some kind. But of course, you would not want. First of all, you try to have people to talk to people individually and get them out of the forum into a individual setting in order to talk to them. So that is the main thing really, in terms of their security, so that they don't open themselves up to others that see what their doubts or anything like that.
All right, thank you. I think, because we also have a couple of questions that we thought about earlier. Generally, we already touched upon the questions of how practitioners can protect themselves if they're working on that. But I think that's a really important issue to highlight. Not only protecting obviously our target audiences, but that everybody, and George, you had some lessons on your slides as well, that practitioners and those implementing this work, and active bystanders or trainers or whatever, definitely need to ensure their own safety. So thinking long and hard about that and how to do that is definitely necessary. And if there are any resources on that, I think there's some work on the research side already, also researcher resilience and safety project. So we're going to try and collect some insights on that as well, share them afterwards.
Okay.
Yes, so I was wondering, because we're also slowly nearing the end, and it's Thursday afternoon, and I don't want to keep people here too long. I was wondering if you could maybe quickly, like all of you, because we've heard a lot now, and I think maybe we're a bit overwhelmed already, maybe summarize the 1 or 2 key tips you would like to give to other practitioners or people trying to design these sort of things. We've heard some in your presentations already, but maybe like the 1 or 2 key tips, key recommendations that you would like everybody to take away from this day. Yes, and maybe let's start again with Linda and then Rachel and George.
Sure. So I would say number 1 is to think broader than video games, because we don't have to be developing video games to engage in the gaming space. Think broader than that. Think gamification, think gaming platforms, gaming references. I think that's going to be much easier to do than actually develop video games, and probably like the better opportunity for PCVE to really utilize gaming. And the second thing I would say is what I said already at the end of my presentation. It starts somewhere. Like, we keep talking about this in sort of theoretical terms, and you could do this and you could do that. But ultimately, we need people to be brave enough to be like, okay, I'm going to try this, and I'm going to then tell people how it went and not be afraid to fail. And to collect just some experiences of how this works, and to then do some best practices of how we can go about this as a PCVE field as a whole.
Thank you very much. Rachel.
Yeah, so my first one would be quite similar to Linda's actually, in terms of when you're thinking about interventions, we can take a lot from what's already out there. So like the marketing space, for example, a lot when people are thinking about, I saw the other day marketing sausages. People were trying to use games to like gamified ways of voting and picking your best sausages, like things like that. People are already using marketing to gain people's attentions and to appeal to a need and what people are already looking for and engaging online. So we don't have to, again, reinvent the wheel, as Linda mentioned in her presentation. We just have to figure out how people are using it for their purposes and see if that's relevant to ours. And then lastly, test. There's never going to be one right way, as we found in testing our game against different kinds of content. It might not always work that way. It might not always be the most engaging content as a game, but we're figuring out what exactly works, what exactly is most appealing, and that might change depending on, as disinformation or extremism and all of the online harms evolve, as they naturally will. So keep testing, keep figuring it out. There's no one answer. Yeah, those are my tips.
Thank you very much. And lastly, George, your key
Okay,
messages.
Well, yeah, I actually agree with Linda and everybody that you don't have to think only video games, because I think there's a great potential in education. Well, but the thing is how to cast a large net, how to reach how to cast a large net so you can then find the target audience. The whole thing is reaching the target audience, and there we're fighting an uphill battle. By the way, of video games, I would like to say that the next thing that in terms of being sustainable as a strategy, I think modding is really the answer. There are possibilities. I think also for simple gamers and practitioners, looking into modding certain games, it has become very, very much simpler, and you can build in things there, and that way you can also go into many more than one single game, because you have also the problem of one single game reaching the target audience. So modding is really the thing that we are focusing on in the future, and active bystandership to be taught in schools. Yes, you can. Every single action matters. It seems to be like a very important thing in general, and how to deal with extremism in schools also is and everywhere through these gamification aspects, because our game has been suggested also to be used in educational settings in schools. So but you have to also be really careful about the messaging. I think that also you shouldn't be too detailed in what you're telling to people to avoid and what you're telling people to do, but really focus on the simple psychology of the target audience would be a very important thing for me.
All right. Thank you very much. And just briefly, because you mentioned it, and I think that's a quite important part, and I saw Linda also nodding heavily, the modding part, just quickly. So you're meaning, just for maybe members of the audience who aren't as well versed in the lingo, that means the modification of existing games, right? Could you maybe give us 1 or 2 sentences of just quick explanation of what that means and why that is maybe a more easy or more feasible way of intervening in these spaces?
Right. So you have various apps now that allow you to download mods and install mods in your computer and to work on that. I mean, so GTA 5, for example, is a good example that is very easy to mod in that way. But I mean, if you go into it strongly, you can build cutscenes into it where you can present people with different decisions to make in storyline mode, and actually you can and also there you should be quite careful not to be very open about not to be very in your face about be a good guy, because that's always boring for gamers. So it is just the kind of you can build different scenes in these mods, and actually they become quite available nowadays for different kinds of gamers, for our activists, but it takes a bit of work. You have to get into the think a little bit more in detail. But right-wing extremists are doing it now, so I mean, you know, why wouldn't we do it?
Yes. So let's not be let them not continue to have the upper hand, maybe in that space. Let's try and be a bit innovative and find solutions. And while it may require a bit of work to get into modding, it's probably still a lot easier than to actually develop a well-functioning video game that the audience will also want to play. I think that's a big issue.
Yes, and you have a lot of players already in those games, and when they really love those games, they play the mods.
Yeah, so you're tapping into an already existing audience and don't have to build it up yourself. Great, thanks to all 3 of you. Please check out the RAN website. We already have a couple of resources on this issue up there. We will share them again. Check out George's website, contact him, contact Rachel. They've all done great work already, and let's continue to exchange and learn from each other. Thank you again, everybody.